Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, Tom. We're going to get through some questions today that were sent in by email, and some were left from the fireside chat from the MBT forum and various other places. So thanks for being here to answer them for us today. Our first question is from Stephen, and he is describing near-death experiences through this interview he watched. Everyone has free will. We were with you. We helped you plan the life you're living. We know the things that you wanted to accomplish and the things you wanted to encounter and to experience. And we want you to know that it's okay. You can stay or you can go back to your life. If you decide you want to go back to your life, we want to show some things that definitely will happen and other things that are potential. They might happen, but everyone, it's important for you to remember that every single person has their own free will. So if an experience that you had planned or thought was going to happen, if the other person makes a choice that undoes that opportunity, then there are particular things that won't happen, but they are probabilities. This is through a guide that this woman was getting this information from. You will remember a lot of what has taken place, but some things you won't be allowed to remember. And the things we showed you about your future, you won't be able to remember that, because if you remembered all the things we showed you, you would lose your free will, because you would no longer say, well, I could choose this instead of this because I was shown this is what's going to end up happening. He said that's why you won't remember anything about your future, but you will remember enough to know that this absolutely happened, and you'll also have proof. Her conclusion about free will was free will is the foundation of real love. Now, how do we sort out this near death experience information that this woman received from your viewpoint from MBT, that it is probabilistic, not deterministic?
Okay. Well, things sometimes can appear to be deterministic. I was told once of a lady who was having an NDE who predicted that one of her children would pass away, would die. That's a pretty awful prediction to give to someone, but I suppose this happened. And indeed, that event took place. Child did die like 2 or 3 years later. So that sounds like it must be predetermined, or it must be a deterministic reality. I myself has had information told to me about future events, not just 2 or 3 years in advance like that, but 2 decades in advance, 20 years earlier. I was told about Pamela, the woman that I would meet and marry, and I was told, that she lived in a place far from where I lived, but that we would meet and have a very good relationship. And I had some special, some things about her that I knew about. And at the time, I was only 14 years old, and Pamela was only 2 years old. And I was told that I would meet her when I was 35. Well, 14 to 35 is just a little bit more than 2 decades. But sure enough, it worked out exactly like that. Exactly when I was 35, I did meet this woman, and it did work out really well. Also, I was told later on that she and I would have several children. I was told how many, of what sex, and given some information about what they look like. And sure enough, it was exactly the way it came out. And that was only maybe 5 years in advance. So there are lots of people who can describe to you stories about things that they knew, visions they saw, words they got, whether it's collected in an NDE or just collected because somebody asked, doesn't matter. These things, there's be lots of stories like that. But that does not mean that this reality is deterministic. It just means that it can appear that way, deterministic. Well, it would certainly seem that how would somebody know who I was going to meet, marry and have children with when I'm 14 and she's 2, lived in different states, hundreds and hundreds of miles apart? How could somebody say that was probable? You see? Well, when you look at the probable future, you can see that some things have very high probabilities, sometimes very far out. You may look at an event and say, oh, that event won't happen for 30 years, but the probability on it is a really strong spike. Well, that's something that you can almost bet on. Now, it's not certain. The probability that will happen isn't 1, but it may be 0.9 or 0.99 or even 0.999, It just depends on the thing. So if you happen to have one of those situations, now let's take myself and Pamela. The situation was that Pamela and I had agreed to meet up and be mates before we were ever born here. That was an arrangement that was also discussed with and approved by and was, was well known about by the system, because I had certain things I was supposed to do and accomplish here. And she did too. So that arrangement was made. Now, once that arrangement's made, just looking at what's the probability that that's going to happen, well, once that arrangement was made and the system was of a mind that it should happen, well, then it just is going to happen. That's a probability of 1, pretty close, that it's going to happen. Because this is a virtual reality and the system can generally make it come out however it wants. So I was nudged times where I was in different states and just had this need to move and go someplace else. And where I had to move to just happened to be, in the same state where Pamela was. And I just happened to get a job there that was not advertised. It was never put open on the job market, but a friend knew a friend who knew a friend, and I ended up with a job at a time when jobs were really, really hard to find. I ended up with this job. And don't you know that not very many months after I worked there, Pamela worked there as well. So that's where we met. And the same sort of thing happened to her. She had these nudges. She was in this kind of a situation, and then just something out of the blue changed that situation, and she needed another. And just out of the blue, this job that was in the same place I was in just happened to open up, and she just happened to get it. You see? So those things happen. Now, those are what I call nudged events. The system can put an idea in your head that you really need to, do something, go somewhere. And you have a strong proclivity to do that. You still have free will, and you can just say, no, I really don't want to. So free will can still rock that boat and make it not happen. But mostly, particularly if you're very sensitive to the intuitive side of yourself and learn to trust it, when you get those nudges, you tend to do what they say. You tend to abide by them and do them, because I learned through many, many examples that when I say, no, I really don't want to do that, usually you end up getting, what's the proverbial joke, slapped with a dead fish, right? Something happens that just isn't good. And you said, oh, that was a mistake. When the system tells you to duck, you shouldn't start a discussion of why. You should just duck. And I learned that rule too. So in that case, it's somebody who is intuitive learns to work with these nudges.
Well,
With,
Tom, I think your situation might be a little different than most, but when you say the probabilities are 0.999, for you, when it's scripted like that, when you have a mission to accomplish and there's a reason for you choosing as you do, it's a slightly different situation. But what would you say, because your model says that this is a probabilistic
Mhm.
reality, what would you say in an ordinary situation, and how would you emphasize that it is still probability?
Well, it doesn't, I'm not that special in that sense, but even assuming that we are, it works the same way. Okay. Now, it may not be as dramatic as mine, a 14-year-old and a 2-year-old, hundreds of miles apart, totally different kinds of situations. From the beginning, you would have said very little in common and so on. So that would look like one in a billion that those two people would end up together. But what about a child dying or something like that, and being about 2 years away or 3 years or even 5 years? Well, that is not that hard necessarily to tell. Conditions that cause death usually don't just pop up out of nowhere. Usually they have histories in biochemistry. They have histories inside the body, things that are developing. When the cancer turns out to be a knob on your neck someplace that you can see it, well, it's not like that you had no cancer in your body at all, and one day it manifested as a big knob on your neck. The signs of that and the biochemistry and the beginnings of that took place years before. You see, so there's lots of things with your biology and just in the world in general that are fairly predictable if you had all the information. Of course, we don't have all the information, so it seems amazing to us that anybody could know things like that. But this is a virtual reality. And in a virtual reality, there's lots of information that is available to the system. Okay, lots of information is available to the system. It has to render us. So it kind of knows what's going on inside and outside because it's rendering us. So it knows all about us. So that's one thing. The system knows a lot. So these probabilities are often based on system knowledge, not on our knowledge. You see, it's not how smart we are, and could we guess that that's going to happen, but could the system guess that that's going to happen in 2 years? Well, different kind of thing altogether. So that's how you can have a big spike pretty far out, because the system has information that we don't. You see, so that's how that can come about. And I don't think the system would take a perfectly normal child and nudge them to have cancer or to do something that would kill them. That's unlikely that the system's going to do that just to make a point. So it would almost certain that the system knew that this was a high probability, a very high probability. Now, there's another possibility. There is a possibility that that was a setup. And this is probably less of a possibility. I'd say this is more of a remote possibility, that those two people, that person having the experience and that child that passed away, that they had some kind of arrangement to play that game. And who knows why? I'd say, well, that would be a pretty terrible game to play, but maybe not. There may be reasons why that needed to happen. Maybe a child who lost a parent blamed that parent, and that hurt went with them. It caused them to de-evolve, had all kinds of things. And they needed to go through that experiment, that same experience from the other side to see, just to get unwadded from what that had done to them. Who knows? And I'm just making things up, but just because it's a kind of a bizarre and a very, unpleasant thing, like a dead child is a very unpleasant thing, doesn't mean that it couldn't be on somebody's plan. Remember, these our lives here are here for us to learn and here for us to grow. And we have thousands of them. And we pick sometimes very special cases that help us grow out of very special problems that we have. So it could be, out in the margins, not real likely, but possibly, that it was a setup, that it was supposed to be that way. And in which case, that system maybe would nudge that outcome, because that was the outcome that had already been decided on as being the optimal experience to help somebody grow up. So that's a possibility. But more likely, it was just something that wasn't that hard to predict if you were the system. And the only reason for telling that person something of that sort would be because, it wasn't going to be the horrible problem that it looked like. It was going to be an okay thing. Like that's the way it would be if they both agreed to do it in the first place. You see, it wouldn't be a horrible thing. It would be what they already agreed to do. Or maybe that was on the path of the parent and their growth and their learning. And maybe the child had something else they needed to do. I don't know. We can't second guess, why everything happens. There's lots of reasons that something could happen.
There's
But the
lots of
fact that
there's lots of thoughts about life path choices, life path experiences that you've chosen before. Is that what you're speaking of
yeah,
here?
well, sure. There is that. So the point is that there can be any number of things that someone might know about that come true. Very, very specific things. Like exactly the number of girls and boys that I would have with Pamela, and basically what each one of them would look like. And the order in which they were born, which came first. So in any case, that's very specific information, not information that you could just guess. But how did they know that? Well, evidently that could be nudged as well. This is a virtual reality. The system can do anything it wants in that virtual reality as long as it doesn't show, as long as it doesn't tip its hand that it's a virtual reality, as long as it's covered with enough uncertainty that nobody can say, look, this is a virtual reality. There's a glitch here. That's impossible. So as long as there's enough uncertainty to cover it over, then the system can do it. You see, so those kinds of events are not enough to come to the conclusion that this is a deterministic reality. Everything else, everything that we know of, and this little thing that you read about this person and what they were told by the guide, says this is a probabilistic reality. You do have free will, but sometimes we can make really good prognostications of things that happen. And sometimes we'll tell you these things just so you'll go, oh, wow, look at this. I heard about this a decade ago and it happened. Because that will help not only open your mind, but open the minds of all the people around you, at least those that know you well enough to know that you're being honest. And something like that happens. So it's an eye opener to put these little, oh, wow situations out there. The system likes to lace our experience with lots of these little, oh, wow experiences just to help put a crack in the door of our closed minds that we will see that reality is different, not just this closed thing that we think it is, this materialistic, deterministic thing. It's different than that. It's bigger than that. It's broader, has more depth. And the system goes to a lot of trouble just to give each of us some insights now and again that the system is a lot bigger and a lot more complex and a lot more significant than what we're told about. And that's some of the ways it does it, by giving us predictions that come true, by showing us, things that we need to know, by synchronicities. The book we need to read jumps off the shelf into our hands. All of those kinds of things are things that the system does just to help wake us up.
Now, aren't your experiments just as the double slit experiment showed, aren't our experiments geared to show that this is a probabilistic reality?
Yes, absolutely. My experiments and basically all of quantum mechanics is already, almost exactly 100 years ago, but give or take a few years, depending on where you think the initial inception of quantum mechanics was. But about 100 years ago, the people who invented quantum mechanics came to the conclusion that our reality is probabilistic, because that's the only way in which they could model what happened. In other words, that's the only way, that's the only process they could use to be able to compute the right answers, to be able to explain it. And that is, particles aren't little chunks of mass, they're probability distributions. And upon a measurement, they use the word collapse. The probability collapses into a physical particle, but that's because of the measurement. You see, the particles themselves don't really exist. Well, that's the way virtual realities work. It's information. The probability is information. You see, so that's what the world's made of. And science now is coming around to accepting that in general, that our world is information-based. So that means it cannot be materialistic because it's not matter-based. It cannot be deterministic because it's information-based. And the information is not all deterministic information. There's lots of natural things on this world that aren't deterministic, like how radioactive atom decays, all sorts of things. There's probability everywhere, natural events. So we know that probability and statistics are used often to describe the natural world. There's lots of information that leads us in that direction.
That's why you can't um, look at some things that appear to be deterministic in a near death experience, because the science tells you that it is a probabilistic reality. Therefore, you can't really cherry pick from a deterministic point of view and bring it into a virtual reality point of view.
Yeah, well, I would say that sometimes this reality looks as if it were deterministic, but it isn't. It just appears that way. So there's an appearance of deterministic things going on. And again, thousands of people. I'm just one of them. And this lady with that had the child die, that, there's thousands of people who have had glimpses of the future in great detail that come out to be exactly that. And there's probably many more thousands that have had glimpses of the future and it didn't come out like that at all. Because though it might have been probable then, things happen in between. And somebody didn't do what it was they needed to do to end up to that probability. So that big peak that was out in the future kind of went down and wasn't so probable anymore. So there's all of that happens.
In rare cases like yours is a unique case. You have a particular mission and a particular plan, both you and Pamela. You would have had, if things didn't happen exactly the way they were supposed to, you would have had a backup plan that would have nudged it further, or a second plan. It's a unique situation now, and it still doesn't negate the free will, as even this woman claimed in Stephen's question. Her conclusion was that free will was the foundation of real love. So it's interesting how that message still came out to her.
Sure. Yes. So free will is a fact. We do have free will, because without free will, you don't have choice. Without choice, you don't have consciousness. Okay. If you have choice, you have to have time before the choice, after the choice. You see, so free will, consciousness, and time are all logically necessary for each other. You can't have one, without the other two. So because we're conscious and we have consciousness, we also have to have free will and we have to have time. So there's lots of ways that the system can engineer a result if it's trying to nudge it. Lots of ways. And if it just can't nudge that result, then it'll come, like you say, to a plan B. There's all right, plan A didn't work out. What's plan B? And then they'll start nudging perhaps to plan B if they've got a particular mission or a particular thing they have to do. So sure, that's just, I mean, that's the way it works. And if plan B doesn't work out, they'll try a plan C. You know, they'll do whatever they can do to get the end that they want. And they probably had 4 or 5 plan A's to start with different people, just in case one of them, you know, something that you weren't planning on, you know, happened to them. Maybe they got run over by a truck, and oops, there goes plan A, you know. So now we have to go and work with somebody else. So the system doesn't put all its eggs in one basket, I would say. That would not be smart in a system of free will. And it has ways of nudging things to the way it wants them to go. And things happen generally for reasons, but there's a lot of randomness. And by randomness, I don't mean perfect theoretical randomness. I mean, there's a lot of things that are out of our control, you know, like what I call social randomness or social Brownian motion. And that is, our lives are impacted by thousands of other people, probably many thousands of other people. And there's no way that we can control that or even know about it. We just have to, you know, what is it? You know, roll with the punches. We have to, you know, sway, you know, with the winds. We just have to adapt and connect and do and make choices within this constantly churning set of possibilities. And those probabilities of those possibilities are changing all the time. So that's just the kind of world that we live in. That's the kind of world I live in. It's always been a swirl of changing possibilities, you know, and I think everybody's like that. And then out of that swirling whirl of possibilities, we make choices. And as we make choices, we change all those probabilities, because something that used to be probable, now we made that choice, that goes away. It's not probable anymore. And something else that was improbable, now it's probable, because if we made that choice, that becomes probable. So the probabilities are changing. And as I make my choices affect other people's choices. And other people's choices affect my choices. So you got this big interactive, you know, ball of 7.5 billion people all changing each other's choices. And I call that randomness. There's a lot of, it's not actually randomness, but it's it's not actually even pseudo randomness, because both of those are very specific, mathematically defined. But it is a source of uncertainty. Let's put it that way. All uncertainty doesn't have to come from randomness. You know, it's a source of uncertainty in our lives, and we don't have determinism, but we do have things that look deterministic sometimes.
Well, thank you, Tom. That we really ran that question in a lot of different directions. So I hope that clarified for you, Stephen.
Well, that determinism, materialism, free will, you know, yes, we have free will. Oh, no, we don't. Look, science has proven we don't have free will, and so on. That's always a big question. Yeah. It comes up a lot, and it keeps coming up and coming up. So it's worth the time to put on that.
It is. Thank you. All right, we'll go to the next question. This is from Moksha, and it is, how do I get rid of the energy and or the thoughts regarding people who separated from me or people I want to be detached from? My thoughts are always circulating about these entities, but I do not want to think about them anymore. How can I delete these player characters or non-player characters inside the PMR game that my IUOC is actually playing? Or are there any other ways for me as pure consciousness to evolve by not doing so? Are there any techniques to not let these energies get into my energy field and to keep my energy inside? whatever inside means in terms of MBT.
Okay. Well, yes, there are. The reason that there are people that you'd like to let go of, but you don't seem to be able to, they just keep hanging out in your mind someplace. Your mind just keeps going back to them and rehashing probably old things, is because you haven't let go yet. You're still attached to those outcomes. You're still attached to those events. You may not still be attached to those people, but you're attached to the significance of those events, to what happened, to how it happened, to why it happened. All of those things you still have an attachment to. And as long as you have an attachment to it, then those people are going to keep bubbling up in your consciousness, and you won't be free of them. The only way to be free of them is to let go. Let go of all of it, not only of just that specific relationship, but everything around it. All of the things that happened, all of the things that you wish would happen but didn't, and all the things that didn't happen that you wish would have, and all the rest of it. Just let it all go. And when you can let go of it, then it will disappear. And until you can let go of it, it won't disappear. It'll always be there. So the ability to let go is all yours. It's not that that person is pulling you back. Now, that person, if they may think about you, and if they think about you, that may trigger a thought in your mind about them. But if you have let go of that, that thought will just be oh yeah, I remember that. Interesting, and then it'll go. You see, it won't stick. So it may reach out and touch you every once in a while from these people in your past, because these people in the past may be thinking about you. You could actually shut that link down too if you wanted. You could say, I don't want any messages from these people. And if you put that in your intent, you can shut that link off. Okay. But even if you don't do that, it won't stick to you. It won't needle at you. It won't, pull you. You won't be attached to it. It'll just maybe touch you and go away. You won't think about it. You won't give it any of your energy. So you give it your energy because you're still connected to it. You haven't gotten over it yet. You haven't let it go. You've let pieces of it go, but not the fear pieces. The fear pieces, the upset, the things that didn't work out right, the negative parts of it that didn't happen, that should have, or whatever. That's the pieces you need to let go of. And then it'll truly go away.
Thanks, Tom. The next question comes from the MBT forum. How do we find the energy for life? The energy to participate in a love-based way. In so many ways, we engage more because we are fearful of the consequences. But when we let go of this fear, there is relief, and often it is hard to engage again without fear because it was so exhausting to engage in the first place with fear. So, to clarify, how do we find the energy to fully and completely participate in life without being motivated by the stick, in the carrot and the stick metaphor?
It's a very good question, Donna. It's an insightful question, too. And that often happens as you grow up and you find yourself first, when you're not so grown up, completely entangled in your ego with other people's egos, your beliefs and other people's beliefs. And all of this entanglement between egos and beliefs and needs and wants and desires, and everybody wants what they want. Everybody wants the world to be the way they want it. Everybody would like to be recognized, loved, cherished, and so on. And most people feel like they are not any of those things. So when you finally outgrow that soap opera that most people call life, there is a tendency just to back off for a while and say, whoa, okay, I finally let go of most of that. I'm not in that constant swirl of negativity, of getting even, of being hurt and hurting. You know, I'm not in that anymore. Let me just hang out outside of it for a while because I don't want to get back into it. It's dysfunctional. And that's a normal way to feel because it is very dysfunctional and you don't know how to go back and touch it, interact with it without getting sucked into it. And you're afraid that if you do go back and touch it, you will get sucked into it. Well, if you've really outgrown it, then you won't get sucked back into it. But that doesn't mean there isn't a little fear there that you might. Eventually, you're being outside, being aloof, and not connecting at that personal level with people, you start to realize that that also has its own emptiness. Not only does all of that gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands in the soap opera, that is emptiness. It's just emptiness of an active negative type, that when you're just aloof from everybody all the time, that's also emptiness. Okay, of a little different type. It's emptiness of a lack of interaction, a lack of value, a lack of stimulation, a lack of interest. Pretty soon, you're just kind of out there floating around in a bubble by yourself, not interacting with anybody, because everybody you know that if you interacted with them, it would just pull you back down into that emotion and fear and need and want and so on. Well, you need to do that. You need to get engaged. And if it does pull you back into it, then that means you haven't outgrown it yet. In that case, what you need to do is get back in it and come back out of it. Get back to the point where you can see it clearly. And then if you get sucked back in it, well, you'll have to work your way back out until eventually you are outside of it. You won't get sucked back into it. And you've been floating around kind of like the hermit, like the, in your own little island, not engaging with people to the point that you're feeling emptiness. What's the point? Well, the point is you need to get back into that interaction and not get sucked into the dysfunction. You need to be helpful to people. And when you really do grow up, it's an easy thing to do, because if the people you're interacting with have a lot of ego and fear and beliefs, and that makes them rude to you, or that makes them, negative to you, well, when you've outgrown it, that doesn't matter. It doesn't bring you down. It doesn't upset you. It doesn't make you unhappy. And you instead start thinking, well, I wonder what I could say or do to help them feel better, to put a little bit of, put a smile on their face. So the fact that they just insulted you is of no consequence one way or another. You just see an unhappy person wallowing around in probably self-pity, their ego, their beliefs. And what could you do to help them out? And maybe the answer is nothing. But there's some parts about that person that are nice and that are positive. Most people aren't only negative. They're just negative in some situations, or negative some of the time, or maybe even most of the time. But there's parts to them that are very nice and worth connecting to, worth exploring and experiencing and connecting, because they will challenge you in new ways now. Not challenge you to fight back and get even, but challenge you to be helpful and to be caring. So then you realize that life is fun again. You're interacting with people. You're mattering. You're helping people grow up. You're helping people let go of their fears and let go of their anger, because you don't get sucked into those games. You let people know that it is possible not to be in that game. You're a great role model, but not if you're just hanging out by yourself in your own lonely little island, not engaging. Well, you're not helping much either. So, yes, for a while, you get on your little island and go, wow, that was a heavy load of, stuff to get through. But eventually that'll pass, and you'll realize that's where the action is. That's where you need to be, is back there with those people again. Also, now that you've grown up, you will attract and be able to find other people who are grown up, people you can interact with in a more full way. And before, when you were not grown up, you couldn't attract those kinds of people. You see, you didn't know many of those. And if you did, well, they seemed slippery. They just, it was hard to corner them and get them to do what you wanted, because you were into manipulation. So it just didn't seem to work out. But now you can form relationships with people like that. And you can hang out with everybody else as well, enjoying their good parts and just basically ignoring their not so good parts. So you get back into life and become part of the solution, not just an extra who's not engaged in what's going on, kind of floating on your own island off in the distance. So it takes time, though. Don't feel bad if you've been floating there a while yet, because it does take a little time to decompress and get yourself together. And don't be afraid that you'll get sucked back into that negativity, because if you do, well, then you need to be, so you can climb back out of it again. Because then you'll learn that lesson a little more soundly next time. And the 10th or 20th time you crawl back out of it, you won't go back in it. You'll be able to stand there and smile in the face of insults. It won't bother you. You'll know when to leave, when to speak, when not to speak, and so on. All of that stuff will become easy for you to do the right thing at the right time, to be helpful to people rather than throw more gasoline on the fire that they constantly carry around. So it'll pass. Eventually, you'll feel a little lonely. You'll feel out of it and not connected, and it'll start to feel a little empty. And you'll realize that though you're not creating a lot of entropy to the situation, you're not really helping reduce it either. And then you'll feel like you kind of need to get back involved, and then you'll start getting back involved, and growth continues. So your growth requires you to get involved, to interact, to embrace, not to stay distant, not to float above. If you float above too long, you have a very high risk of developing more ego. You float above, now you look down on those unwashed masses as being inferior and ungrown and unworthy of your time. And you start developing arrogance and ego and beliefs in your own wonderfulness. And then that can keep you from growing up. So that's the point. You see, you have to keep growing. In order to grow, you need to engage. And when you engage, you'll engage at whatever level you happen to be at. But that's exactly where you need to be, because that's the point from which you must start to grow. So don't be put off by engaging in that messy world with all those messy people in it, with all their ego and their fears. Just go engage it in a positive way, not a negative way. You don't come back to tell everybody else the truth and how they need to grow up. You see, you can show them truth and how to grow up from your own actions, but you can't lecture people and tell them how to be. You have to find ways to be helpful without trying to tell people what to do. And that takes a little creativity on your part. So that's what I'd say. It's a natural feeling. And you say, how do you get back to it? Well, once you feel stale enough, having floated above everyone for long enough, if it hasn't turned you into an arrogant person who thinks they're better than other people, then you'll start feeling the need to reconnect, and do so slowly. But don't shy away from the ones that are still carrying around a lot of fear. You can reconnect with them as well. There's value in almost everybody. You just have to seek it out. And the parts that are not so valuable, you need to just avoid those parts. So you can have good relationships with very ordinary people. that are very meaningful and be part of the solution. Help those people grow up. Not necessarily overtly, like, oh, you people, here's what you need to do to grow up. You know, it's not like that, but just by being an example, just by holding somebody's hand, just by being there when they need someone, you can help them grow up.
Well, thank you, Tom. There is a second part to the question, a small part. It seems that when we're in our heads and behaving unconsciously, lost in thought and emotion cycles, that time moves extremely fast. Yet when we are present and aware of this moment, time seems to stretch out and even sometimes feels eternal. If the LCS holds the master clock and time is either the concept of time in our minds or future probabilities, might it be possible that those who have felt a sense of no time or eternity are experiencing time as it exists for the LCS, which we are fundamentally a part of, an eternal moment outside of all the virtual realities?
Well, yes, that's not a metaphor that I've heard before, but that's a good metaphor. Yeah, it is somewhat like experiencing what the way the LCS sees time. Sort of. You know, it's not the perfect metaphor, but it's certainly a good metaphor, and it fits in many ways. You know, time in our virtual reality is created by a time loop. A virtual reality is a simulation. If that simulation is a dynamic simulation, which means things change, things move, you know, it's a dynamic simulation, then there will be an outer time loop that drives everything else. So now the time when it starts is t equals 0, and next it's t equals delta t, just a little bit of time, delta, a little chunk of time. Next it's t equals 2 delta t, and next it's t equals 3 delta t. And time just keeps chugging along as that time loop runs through all the code that creates the virtual reality. So time in our reality is our outer time loop of the simulation that is our virtual reality. So that's where time comes from. Time is a real fundamental thing for us in this virtual reality, but every virtual reality can have its own time clock. And the time isn't always necessarily the same. You know, the delta t can be smaller if you need higher resolution in time, or bigger if you don't need high resolution in time. And some things, some parts of that simulation can move forward at bigger time loops, and other parts can move forward at smaller time loops, depending on the resolution that's required. Now, our perception of time is very different than time. Our perception of time depends on change, depends on something by which we can measure it. Okay, so if we sit and, you know, watch the seasons change, then we have a sense of time. We can see it go from, you know, summer to fall to winter to spring to summer and fall. We can see those things. So that gives us a measure of time passing. If we're on a busy street and people are walking back and forth, that gives us a sense of time passing. If we are in a dark room with absolutely no light, and we are not, you know, we're being suspended, magically, above the floor, so there's no pressure, there's no sense of touch, then there's nothing by which to judge time. Now, at first, you can judge time by counting 1, 2, 3, and those are seconds. But eventually you give up on that because it's too tedious, too long, to go on forever. Eventually, if you've been there for a while, you have no idea how much time's passed. Has it been days, or has it only been hours, or only minutes? And you begin to get very confused about time because you don't have any changes by which to measure the passage of time. So in that case, you can say time goes very slowly, or maybe it goes very quickly. It depends on you, what you're doing. If you're, like you mentioned in the first part of what you read, is that if you're very busy, focused on something, time seems to move right along. And particularly if there's some conclusion you need to come to, some result, some product you need to produce, and you need it produced by the day after tomorrow, now time seems to speed along tremendously, because when the day after tomorrow comes, you're going to be on the hook for having produced something and you don't have it done yet. So now you're very conscious and time seems to go by at a gallop. You're there at the end way too soon. You need to slow time down so you have more time to get it done. You see, on the other hand, if you're just sitting along your favorite pond with a fishing rod in the water and nothing on the other end, maybe just a sinker, you're not really there to catch fish. You're just there to be out in nature and sit there and pretend you're fishing, because otherwise, if you just sat there without doing anything, people would begin to suspect you, there's something wrong with that guy. Is he a bum? So you sit there with your fishing rod and pretend to fish. And that time, it may go by very slowly. You may get up and, you may realize, oh, look, it's getting dark already and I have to go home. Gee, didn't I just get here? So that all has to do with the perception of time. And that depends on what markers we have to make our clocks. Like if you were in that room where you couldn't see anything, but what if you could hear birds chirping on the outside? Well, you'd know every morning when the birds start chirping that was dawn and the birds were getting up and starting to move around and chirp. But if you didn't have any inputs, you see, you couldn't measure time. You wouldn't know, an hour from a day. You wouldn't be able to tell because there's no things. You might think, well, I've been thinking all these things, so it must be a long time, but you can think very quickly. Thinking can go by very, very fast. It doesn't have to take a long time.
Tom, wasn't there an experiment at Stanford on a time deprivation experiment where no watches, no clocks, were people were isolated from time? Do you recall reading about that experiment and what it did, having no
No,
sense of time?
I am not familiar with the experiment, but it sounds like a very good experiment to do. And I can imagine that people got very confused about the time. And you probably had people thinking that a whole lot of time had gone by when it hadn't, and other people thinking that not much time had gone by when it had, because people would just get confused when they lack markers by which to measure time. If there's nothing there but your own mind's functioning to measure the passage of time, then maybe you could measure it on how long has it been since the last time you urinated. Well, okay, I've urinated 5 times and that usually takes me about 3 hours between, so it must be about going on 8 hours since we've been here. Well, that's a clock. See, that's a timepiece. You're using that in your memory. So people tend to hold on to things like that, and if you're clever, you can maybe come up with things like that. Oh, am I feeling hungry? Well, if I am, then maybe it's lunchtime. You see, but eventually, if you're in that situation long enough, you lose those things. You lose them because there's just water to drink and you drink it when you're thirsty and it doesn't really mean anything. The time isn't, so it depends on how long you're there. And the longer those people are there, then the less those little tricks that they might have to try to measure time would go away. And pretty soon you'd have a room full of confused people. Wouldn't really, be pretty poor at guessing how much time had gone by, and depends what they do with their mind. If they say, oh, gee, this experiment, I'm getting paid $100 to participate in this experiment. It's a great time for me to go over all the things that I've been trying to learn here, or to memorize, to keep working on my memorization, something like that. Oh, they let me have a book. So I'm supposed to memorize these parts. I'm going to be in a play and I've got an hour's worth of dialogue that I have to memorize. What a great opportunity. And you could sit in there and be memorizing dialogue, and at the end they'd say, okay, you know, you've been in here for 12 hours, and you might think, oh, I thought I was only in here for a few hours, because you were busy all the time. So you didn't notice the time was going by. But all of that has to do with the perception of time, and not so much to do with time itself.
Yes. There's a third part to his question. You have mentioned that it is important to hold an intention to be loved, to grow up. From my own experience, it's felt like the love intention is a state of being from which all else flows or is a part, and that it takes courage to persist in this intention or state. To what degree should this intention be at all times or at any given moment?
Well, you're right. That is, your experience is a very good experience. Love is what matters. Love is, the fabric of our reality. I think that's something I've said some other time. I think that went by me not long ago on a quote. Love is the reason we're here, to become love. That's the power. That's what changes things. That's what makes evolution evolve. So, yes, love is a very important thing. And again, when love becomes something you're doing, then that's often driven by things other than really love. Love has to be something you are, not something you're expressing through doing. Well, yes, you will express your love through doing, but love is a state of being, which is what he said in the very beginning. Yes, it's a state of being, not a state of doing. You can be kind, and loving people are kind. But you don't think of yourself as being kind because you want to be loving. Now you're being kind for a reason other than just being kind. It's because you want to seem like you are something else, maybe that you're not. That's acting kind. So when you are loved, then you just are also kind. You are also considerate. You also are aware of other people and their needs and their feelings and that sort of thing. So, yes, he's got that right. Love is about being, and it becomes just who you are. It's not something you have to stay focused on. It's not something you have to keep in your mind. It's not something you have to think about. It just is who you are. And you interact with people, you laugh and smile a lot, you connect with all sorts of people, some of which have lots of fear and lots of ego, lots of beliefs, but you connect with them anyway because they're family or because they're friends or because they're neighbors. And you try to always be helpful to them and never create more fear for them or more unhappiness. So it just becomes the way you are and what you do. And it becomes I don't know what to say it. It's just who you are, and it's every day, and you don't think about it. You just are it. So in that case, you lose the intellectual sense of being loved. You don't intellectually think of it. You just like people, and you like interacting with people, and you like helping people. And you particularly enjoy being useful to people. If there's something you can really do to help somebody out, you go out of your way to find that because that's one of the things that makes you feel good.
So
So
setting the attention for that eventually becomes that.
yeah,
Setting the intention for love eventually morphs into
just
your state of being.
just
That's
being
what you
love.
are.
Yeah, just being love. So you start out, yes, with an intention. I'd like to become that. But the more you become it, the more you just are it. And it's no longer an intellectual process of any sort. You just live it and be it, and it makes you happy. It gives you joy, and you feel good about who you are and what you're doing and all the people that you're interacting with. But now that takes time. We're talking about somebody who's very grown up when we get to that. most people are not so black and white in their growth. In other words, it's not like you are either all love or you're all fear. You know, everybody has parts of them that are love, that it's caring. Everybody, well, let's just say most everybody has parts of them that are loving. Most everybody have parts of them that are fearful. Most everybody have parts of them that are egotistical and arrogant. And most everybody is walking around with a lot more beliefs than they even know they have. You know, but people are also parts of love. They do care about things and about other people. It's just a matter of developing till you have more of the loving part and less of the other part, less of the fearful part. So it's not a matter that you, one day you pop out and you're total love. It's not so much like that as just, it's a very slow process of refining who you are and what you are, changing yourself so that you more and more represent love. And as you do that, it's less and less a part of your intellect. It's just the way you are. It's not something you think about. It's not even so much an intention you have. It's just the way you are.
With all those choices we have.
Yeah, well, the more you love, the more you care, and the more you grow up, the more choices you get. You start living in a bigger reality. And you find out that, oh, that reality I lived in 30 years ago, oh, that was just a teeny tiny little reality. It didn't have much in it. Just a few things, you know. It had the people in it that were most important to me and not much else. You know, that was about the whole reality. So, yes, your reality grows as you grow up. Your decision space grows. The information that you get, the information that you send, all of it grows. Your whole world gets bigger. And your ability to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem grows. And it's not something you have to figure out. It's just something that you are.
Thank you, Tom. Those were all great questions. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome, Don. It's always fun to answer people's questions. Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.